the ultimate Great Western steam locomotive in all its glory. But what was it like to drive and to fire one of these machines? It may look big and complicated, but looks can be deceptive. It's a simple machine, really. And by turning the clock back exactly 100 years before the first king was built, we can see that it was very similar to the granddaddy of them all, the rocket. The truth is that George Stephenson sorted it out for us and would have known exactly how to drive a king. You can see how clever Stephenson was by looking at what they were building in France that same year, 1829. A Great Western driver would have struggled with this one. Side by side, the two engines are completely different. Stephenson used the exhaust to create a draft to the chimney, but the French machine employs a pair of giant wooden bellows because they wasted the chuff of the exhaust, spitting it straight out of the cylinders at rail level. Furthermore, a peep inside Rocket's firebox reveals tubes that make a critical difference in the ability to boil lots of water. Stephenson had even begun to incline his cylinders towards the horizontal, linking them to a peg on the driving wheel. British Railways finally came home to the same layout. But look again at the French locomotive. Vertical cylinders, hammering the brittle rails at every stroke. More living evidence of why the Stephensons are regarded as fathers of steam.
Stephenson's rocket was the first engine in the world that had a tubular boiler with a blast pipe, which meant that the fire box was connected to the chimney via a series of small tubes which ran through the water in the boiler, so they increased the heating area. And then the exhaust steam from the cylinders was forced up the chimney to increase the drafting, which actually helps draw the fire and improve the efficiency of the engine. Marc Sagan looked at achieving the same thing in a slightly different way. He opted for bellows on the tender of the engine, which are belt driven as the engine drives along, and that forced the air through the firebox and then up the chimney. His chimney, you'll see, is at the same end of the engine as the firebox.
So the poor old French chauffeur was forever trying to see past his vast wooden hairdryer on wheels. Rocket, on the other hand, was more or less what a Great Western engineman would have expected to find on the footplate.
What we've got to do, the main thing, close the fire hole door so I don't set my leg on fire. And then this is the regulator. So we open the regulator and hopefully we'll go backwards, which we are. So need to just run back a little way. And then work the pedal down here and you'll see it drop into reverse gear. Drop into forward gear, I should say. So now we've got full regulator open, so that's acting as a brake. So we'll eventually come to a standstill, open the regulator, and then we should go forward.
Stephenson's next trick after Rocket was to lay the two cylinders between the frames, acting on a crank axle. And that was it. The steam engine didn't need to change for 100 years. Superheating of steam was introduced somewhere along the way, but not on all engines. And by 1929, the Rocket had turned into this, the unsuperheated son of Stephenson, in the shape of the Great Western Pannier Tank, and nothing better was ever devised. Panniers appeared in all sorts of shapes and sizes, a distinctively Great Western concept which avoided the saddle tank's problem of where to fit the safety valves and the dome, but also left the chassis accessible to the engine men. The Great Western had inherited a variety of little engines, like this four-wheeler that previously belonged to the Cardiff Railway. It was absolutely non-standard, but survived because it did its job in the city's dock, and there was no need to change it. But when the Great Western did need a new tank engine, it usually came with those trademark panniers. This is Swindon's idea of a dock shunter. But of all the Pannier tanks, it was the 5700 class that proved the most successful. These 50-tonners were comparatively powerful, and the engine men liked them.
They're easy to maintain, easy to service, easy to fire, and very economical on coal and fuel.
We used to take the empty coaching stock up to Old Oak, like, you know, and when you pull out of a sidings with 11, 12, 13 on, and up, you've got to go up the hill and over the main line down the other side. So they worked them really hard up there, but it was only for minutes, like, you know.
They were superb little engines. They could take a good train of mixed freight, or they could shunt all day. Also, we had them on passenger trains, autocar trains, that's one push and pull.
They're going to see me using the regulator, the reversing lever and the brake. So I've just been given the right of way, so we'll take the brake off. We'll put it in the right gear, so we're going backwards. Release the vacuum brake by creating the vacuum in the train pipe. Blow the whistle and just crack the regulator.
Firemen wanted an easy life, which made the 5700s popular.
The main thing, I think, is they were incredibly easy to work with. As steam locomotives go, they steam well, they ride fairly well for a small locomotive. They're very, very strong, and I think you'll rarely find an old locomotive man who would have any real word against them. Lots of the areas with small branch lines, South Wales for example, a lot of the Valley Line passenger services were run with these engines. So there were so many of them spread across the entire Great Western system and doing everything apart from fast passenger work or the very heaviest of freight. So they were hugely important to the Great Western, which is incredible really, because they're basically a Victorian design. The engine part of the engine, the cylinder and valve design, the whole layout of the underframe chassis is straight out of the 1870s, 1880s and no later really. The boiler itself isn't a particularly advanced design, but is a very, very good producer of steam.
Panniers would pop up everywhere. They'd manage empty coaching stock of up to 15 or 16 carriages, so branch line work held no terrors, even when it was steep. But mostly they simmered in the yard, and the trick was to keep them quiet.
You've got 3 or 4 ways of firing a little pannier. That's virtually a square box. And the first little Welshman, he told me when I was a young lad, went on the engine, he said, just fire the 4 corners, sonny. He said, leave the middle virtually low. And then he said, when we stop for tea break, which or there's no to shunt, he said, the middle will die and the engine won't blow off and make a noise. And that was his way of doing it, that was, a little bloke called Emlyn Hughes. And then or the drivers said keep more under the back and let the front go out. So you had to do what the driver said. He was the gaffer, he was in charge.
Eventually, panniers found their way onto the Midland and Southern regions, even banking boat trains on the mountainous 1 in 30 climb out of Folkestone Harbour. Southern engine men still remember the charismatic little panniers.
I thought they were eminently practicable locomotives. They were very nice. They bounced a bit. The coil springs in the cab were something you kept your fingers away from. You had 1 foot in a hole in the floor and 1 foot up on a ledge when you were firing. But I still thought they were nice engines.
Among the variants were Collett's designs, specifically for passenger working. There were different wheel sizes, and some were fitted for push and pull. Swindon was building Pannier tanks well after the Second World War. Hawksworth adapted the concept to take a tapered boiler, and there were more than 200 of this design alone. The Pannier tank was the railway's key motive power unit. Tucked away on the South Devon Railway, the last survivor of the dock panniers is still hard at work. The class is remembered for creeping about on Weymouth Quay with heavy passenger trains. It's unusual for a pannier type in having outside cylinders. The wonderfully scenic route climbs from Totnes up to Buckfastleigh on the shoulder of Dartmoor, following the river. So 1369 will be working hard on the journey north, in the hands of a former Great Western driver, Richard Pearce.
We've had the tip from the guard, we blow the whistle, and we get underway. Right, we put the steam on, not too much because we don't want the wheels to slip. The lever's in full 4 gear, plenty of volume of steam to overcome the drawbar drag. Close the brake ejector, the vacuum pump's taken over now, close the blower, bit more steam. Pull the lever up and the engine will increase speed. Line speed of 20 miles an hour with checks in between where the track is particularly rough and there are some worries about slips towards the River Dart. Lovely little engine, but it has to be handled with kid gloves. This engine will do most things on this line providing we don't get more than 4 coaches.
The panniers are usually remembered with affection.
They were plenty of power for what they were meant to do. They wouldn't run very fast trains, but although we had them on passenger trains through to Fairford or Prince's Risborough and Kingham and back, and occasionally to Banbury and back. But yeah, nice little engines. I like the Western Pannier engines. They were standard. You got on one, you almost got on anyone.
Pannier tanks had originated in the 19th century when the GWR was still building outside frame locomotives with hidden driving wheels. Then, in 1936, came a surprise. By cannibalising two Victorian designs, the Great Western introduced the Dukedog, a throwback to another age. They had the old-fashioned 440 wheel arrangement. Their job? To keep the wheels turning in Wales until more modern replacements arrived. This last survivor is seen returning to traffic on the Bluebell Railway after rebuild. It'll steam hard on a line where even the big engines have to work for a living. There's a damp tunnel on an incline. It's no trouble for this 10-wheeled engine, but the lightweight Dukedog might struggle here. Bluebell drivers are always alert for a possible slip inside the tunnel, which never dries out. It's only a couple of days since the Earl of Berkeley came back into traffic, so it'll be a voyage of discovery for the driver Sam Hall, particularly on a slippery rail with the first train of the day.
Right away. Right, give it a little bit of regulator. You can hear the steam going into the cylinders. And we should start making a move. Being an 040, this is a very light engine on its feet, so you have to give it a little bit more gentleness on the regulator. But everything seems to be going well. We've got the road, and as I say, you can just serve it slipping there. We're being the first train of the day, the rails still have a bit of grease and wetness on it. Quite a steep climb this, it's 1 in 75 all the way up, so the engine has to work quite hard. You can feel the engine now, it's beginning to bite quite well. We'll leave it like this, just knock the regulator down a bit, keep the speed going and don't touch nothing now. All I've got to do if anything goes wrong is shut the regulator and open it back up again. I'll get the torch ready just to get a bit of light in the subject. And I can see the porthole of the tunnels coming up, and we're going to enter the gloom any minute. There we go, 2 on the whistle, and in we go.
Sharpthorne Tunnel is long enough and slippery enough to bring a light-footed engine slithering to a standstill. And sure enough, the Dukedog is soon spinning her wheels, with Sam Hall juggling the regulator to keep her on the move.
As I say, the rails are very, very wet, and being a light engine on its feet, it just wasn't getting adhesion. So you were spinning the wheels. It's like driving a car on ice. You've really got to take the power off to try and get adhesion. And that's what you do. You pump the regulator, drop the power off, and increase the power on and off so the wheels have got something to grip. If it had carried on, I think we probably might have stalled, but we didn't. There were some dry patches in the rail that I could see, and we got through it quite well. But I don't think I want to do this in December when it's icy and snowing that time, because it gets very cold, very icy in there. So let's bring the big engines for that time.
And bringing out the big engines was exactly what the Western did 100 years ago. Why grip with 4 wheels when you can use 6? This engine, built in the 50s, is a descendant of a Great Western idea that was to dominate 20th century steam. Back in 1903, this jumble of pipework represented the cutting edge of steam technology. Churchward's new engines were being introduced, and a direct descendant is this immaculate Hall-class machine. More than 300 were built, and it was often said that they and the Panniers could have run the whole Great Western system on their own.
The 49s, the early Halls, were very good. They were jack of all trades. You can do any job with those. But the best ones were the late Halls, the 79, the modified Halls. They were quick. In fact, I think I preferred those to the Castles. They smaller wheel and they got away quicker. You had it all, not so much power, but they seemed to get away quicker, and we were very happy with those.
Tip from the guard, away. Got the starter pull. Right, here we go. Pulling away. Easy at first. Right, now pull it back to about 45%. Fireman at the back is making up the fire. Boiler pressure's dropping a little bit.
In steam days, no 2 engines were the same, even if they were members of the same class.
If you work 6 days a week, you could be on the same job and get 6 different engines, and all them 6 different engines, they'd all be different. There might be 6 Halls, but you'd have a good Hall, you'd have one that was good running, you'd have one that's a good steamer, you'd have one that leaked, the tubes leaked, superheater had gone, boxes knocking. They were all different. If you had a strange engine come on, somebody else's Hall, and you'd never been on it, and until you left Paddington, then you'd know, because bang, 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 you know it was roughing the boxes, and when you're doing 60 through slow, it'd be thumping and banging, the cab would be shaking, and that's what they was like.
An old lady now, she was built in 1946 from the second batch. She's starting to wear a little bit like all the others. She's done several thousand million miles. She's been overhauled about 20 years ago. From the knocking and the banging of her, she's about due for another overhaul at the moment.
Very often we had one of those on the 5:30 passenger from Oxford at night, which was the same timing from Ditcheat to Paddington as the Bristolian. And the Bristolian would go flying through about 90, and we were down to 50 miles an hour around the gully, the curve from Oxford to Ditcheat, and we were the same time from Ditcheat to Paddington as the Bristolian. So I always think we had the fastest train in England, the 5:30 from Oxford. We only had 6 carriages, but we had to do it nevertheless.
There was a lot of what might nowadays be called on-the-job training, with the fireman learning by his mistakes as he went.
You were not trained at all. You did not get 1 minute of training. All you did, you went with the driver that knew what he was doing, and he said, oh, put a bit of coal in that corner, or put a bit of coal up the front there, or put the injector on to put some water in the boiler, or get some coal down, break those lumps up. He told you, and then experience came to the fore. After a while, you knew what you were doing, and you just did it automatically.
But sometimes it went horribly wrong. This engine is short of steam. They didn't always keep going. Sometimes locomotives simply ran out of steam and had to stop for a blow-up. It was known as being down the pan.
Once your steam pressure started leaving the red line, you was frightened to put the injector on because it was going backwards. At the same time, water was going down, and to come to a stage where you've got to do something about it. If you're on a freight train, you could slow down to a signal box, give him a good blast and half a dozen blows on the whistle if he'd got a loop or a refuge, and when you went by, you told him you wanted to go back inside or in the loop, because you'd literally got to do something with the fire, and that's when you was down the pan. Yeah.
The Halls were mixed traffic engines and did some of their heaviest work on the fast-fitted freights.
One job we had called the Panic was from Morris Cowley, first stop Birmingham, with pressings guaranteed from Morris Cowley, press steel firm at Cowley, to Austin's factory in Longbridge, guaranteed overnight delivery for the line next day. Then back to Bourneville Turn, back to Longbridge, onto a trainload of empty box fans, 43 fully fitted empty box fans, straight back up to Morris Cowley. So that was a good night's hard work.
At the beginning of the 20th century, Churchward was figuring out how to fit heavy freight locomotives into his new family of big engines. He wanted to standardise as many parts as possible, and what he came up with was the 28 and 3800 class. They were mineral traffic engines, but used the boiler which eventually found its way onto the Halls. The key difference was smaller driving wheels and more of them, plus a two-wheel leading axle to give the classic 280 wheel arrangement. They were an absolute favourite of some engine men.
They steamed well, they always kept going. You'd still got power if you went back 40, 50 pound of steam, you'd still got the power. We never had trouble with them really. It all depends how long they'd been out, because being on freights, some depots used to turn them round and send them straight back without cleaning the fires, like, you know. So you'd struggle on the way back because you'd start clinkering up.
This survivor once hauled coal trains in Wales, but in retirement it plays about in Gloucestershire with little passenger trains. A glance at the footplate reveals its Spartan nature. Mr. Churchward did not concern himself much with the comfort of his crews.
No, I'm afraid you've got to be tough, you know. There was nothing to sit on, a bit of wood, that's all. But you couldn't sit on that going along on these things because they got bumping and banging. They soon woke it up and chuck it off.
The fireman will have a number of things going through his mind as he prepares an engine in the morning.
Water between a quarter and 3/4 roughly. Never let it drop below a quarter, and it's not very good firing if you go above the top. Coal, you want a nice even fire, nice glowing red. If you've got white hot spots, that means you need to put coal on them. It only means you might have a hole. A raw means you've got a hole in the fire, and the fire doesn't go at all then. Steam, this one blows off light at about 200. So we want to keep working between about 200 and 160. On those pressures, the driver has no problem.
I'll give it a bit more regulator, get a bit more speed. When we start picking up a speed, I can remove the valve gears back to give us more speed again. By doing that, I have to shut the regulator down because the steam pressure in the cylinders is stopping me from pulling the valves back.
front of them is a summer's day in the glorious Gloucestershire countryside at the foot of the Cotswolds.
Basically, there's very little to do. Just keep an eye on the water, which is well up, keep an eye on the fire, and that's it. We're now going downhill. The driver shut off steam, so I'm making steam fairly fast. The water's now gone down, so what we're doing is we're injecting water from the boiler, from the tank into the boiler. That requires steam pressure, so I open the water, put on steam pressure, that injects the water via an injector. So that takes away steam, puts in water. So we bring the water level up. Because we're about to blow off, that keeps the steam almost stable. That's a nice state of affairs.
They were really built for the job they done. And I mean, they made little work of it. Full loads and a 28 and a 38. You never had a problem. I never had a problem. Big firebox. Good Welsh soft coal. Clean firebox. No trouble at all steaming. No trouble at all. Made your job easy.
At Oxford Shed, where Dick Tolley worked, the crews used 3 different types of 280, including Midland and Great Central designs, but preferred the Western machine to the others.
They were the most superior engine we had. We had the LMS Class 8s, but they were flat compared with the 28. The worst ones we had were the First World War ROD 3000 class. Oh, they were terrible things. They had one speed, about 30 miles an hour, and you couldn't make them go any faster.
Speed was an issue of concern to Churchward, and not just for expresses. A new class of passenger was appearing, who wanted to live in the suburbs and work in the city. In London, all the railways eventually took commuters to work with tank engines. Always individualistic, the Great Western settled on the 262 or Prairie wheel arrangement. The result was a compact machine whose forte was accelerating smartly between the frequent stations.
They were built basically for passenger and suburban work as a stop-start rapid machine, stopping at every station, and they were designed so you could get away quite quickly, get up to line speed so the trains could keep time. That was really the core of the reasons why they were built.
The West Somerset Railway, 20 miles long and with several stops, is the ideal line for an engine like this, and 4160 is in its element here.
The West Somerset Railway is very typical of a normal Great Western branch line. The Loco is effectively doing exactly what it was designed to do. The West Somerset Railway has 9 station stops, so as a result there is an awful lot of stop-start work.
At its eastern end, the line starts with a climb steepening to 1 in 80.
We're about a minute before departure. I've just opened the driver's brake ejector, which effectively will take the brakes off the train. The Loco's already in full forward gear, ready for pulling away. The cylinder drain cocks are open just to expel any excess water out of the cylinders. So from my point of view, everything is pretty much set to go. From Mer's point of view, he's got to make sure that the fire is ready for the climb up to Crocombe and make sure that he's happy with the water level in the boiler.
I'm just going to put the injector on now to top the boiler up to keep the safety valves from lifting.
And the fire, Merv, what state is the fire in?
It's pretty cool at the moment. I've now got the blower on. I'm trying to warm the fire up before we go.
Just Open the ejector before we leave to make sure the brakes are fully off. Give us some regulator. Okay. Just close the blower once we've departed. We basically have a lever cut off on this locomotive. They were more commonly used on a more like mixed traffic type of locomotive. It's much easier in shunting applications than using a screw. You more commonly find a screw reverser on a passenger type loco rather than a freight loco.
There's a smaller version of the Prairie Tank too, and the West Somerset is lucky to have had the two types working together. The appearance of this engine in 1923 opened a new chapter in locomotive history. The castles were in production for nearly 30 years, and there's no parallel for this in the modern era. They fiddled with drafting and superheat, but basically Churchward had done the thinking in advance, just like Stephenson did a century earlier.
The main locomotive design push in the Great Western Railway happened at the turn of the century. And this left the railway with a legacy of Edwardian designed engines. And the designers afterwards, Collett and Hawkesworth, never really saw a reason to change it. They were built primarily to run high-speed, low-weight trains. There were 171 of them built, and they were successful at express passenger traffic. Therefore, they were built between 1923 and 1951.
Enginemen from other regions who sampled the castles were generous in their praise of this elderly design.
They were ahead of everybody in taper boilers, the valve arrangements, the design of controls. They were beautifully put together, and they got a standard that they didn't bother really to proceed any further from. They had a set of men who were trained to work those engines in the way they had to be worked, and they did it very nicely. It was primitive stuff though to anybody else, because when they oiled their engines up, it was a labour doubled in effort to anybody else's engines. When you threw the fire out of a Western engine, it was harder work than anybody else's engines. When you shoveled on a Western engine, you had to shovel from the floor you never straightened your back. The tender was designed so that as the coal diminished, you had to walk back into the tender, maybe 3 or 4 feet, and then come out of the tender and turn around and throw the coal into the fire. So it was really hard work.
These flying machines were a picture of effortless elegance, but as any fireman would point out, there's nothing effortless about a steam engine. On a train like the Cornish Riviera Express, he'd be working non-stop for 4 hours on one of the toughest schedules in Britain.
I liked the castles. They rode well, they steamed quite well, and the fastest I did on one was 93 miles an hour, and that was going, an old steam engine.
They'd rig up a primitive canvas sheet to keep the elements out. On a freezing night at 90 miles an hour, it was a wild ride. Even at 20 miles an hour, the footplate of a castle is a dark, satanic mill. But Great Western firemen wouldn't have swapped for other people's engines.
Well, I've been on them all now. You know, I've been a lucky man. I've been on a lot of engines, every region. The oldest I've been on is a Stirling single. You know, I've been lucky to have drove a lot of different types of engines, but coming back to the Western, when you look at the mainline engines, I still prefer the Castles and the Kings. I don't know why, but there's something about other regions that didn't quite, in my opinion, they didn't quite get to what we had.
Jeff White regularly worked between Paddington and Wolverhampton and back, a good day's work for a fireman. And of the two types of express engine, he preferred the castles with their slightly longer legs and smaller appetite.
On the Wolverhampton road they had Castles and Kings, and they used to still hang 12 or 13 behind you, but the two engines done the same timings. They still kept on time, like, you know, so. But if you got a shorter train, the Castle was a far better engine, far better riding engine.
I think a Castle was a better engine for its size than a King was for its size. I don't think the King was such a great advance over a Castle at all.
Was there ever a more successful frontline express steam locomotive in 20th century Britain? Well, Gresley learned from them, Maunsell on the Southern tried and failed to outdo them, and Stanier rescued the Midland by adapting their precepts. And only very slowly were they outclassed at all. Dawn at Minehead in Somerset, and fireman Alan Dorrington is waking up a giant.
There's various schools of lighting up. Whether you put the coal in first or you put the coal in after.
This is a typical Great Western firebox, long and deep but narrow, and it's fitted to one of Churchward's heavy mineral engines. They were built for the coal traffic in South Wales, but in retirement they take it easy. The typical heritage train of half a dozen carriages is simply child's play. It'll take 2 or 3 hours to bring the pressure up enough to move the engine, and in the meantime, with the occasional slurp of tea, Alan Dorrington and his driver Ron Ireland will be acting out a well-rehearsed duet around the engine. They each have their own responsibilities, but the fireman secretly believes that his is the best job.
What you notice is that most drivers are frustrated firemen because you've only got to step off the footplate to do some coupling up or something, and you hear the shovel go in and you say, "Oh, get off there, that's my job," you know.
The first passengers are turning up, so it's time to get on the move. This is a real Shire horse of a locomotive.
Brute of an engine. It was built to pull, you know, heavy coal trains up the Welsh valleys, and it wasn't built to pull carriages. You get from here to Dunster, which is only about 2 or 3 miles, and you'd note it on the flat, and you'd notice, because I was one of the first to go out and fire it, that we'd use nearly half a tank full of water according to the gauge. And as we got 20 miles to go, you know, it's a bit of a worry. So it didn't endear itself at the beginning. 1 or 2 other little sort of snaggy jobs. So we got the reputation of being the black pig, but I actually like it.
The big tank engine has the same sort of tractive effort as a castle, and could happily trundle along with 20 carriages rather than 6. Before starting, there's time for a guided tour of the cab.
Okay, well, on the driver's controls we've got the regulator, which is like the accelerator on a car. You've got a reversing lever, which gives you a cut-off for your steam, equivalent to your gear lever in a car. Forward to go forward, back to go back, and these different cut-offs for the percentage of steam going in the cylinders. This is your vacuum brake, so it's off at the moment, on over there. That's the 3 basic controls that the driver's using. This is a lubricator, because the steam needs some oil to go in with it to the cylinders, and that's a displacement lubricator filled with oil. We take some steam from the boiler, and this isn't the heater for the driver. This condenses the water back, the steam back to water, floats underneath the oil, or the oil floats on the water, pushes up, and you can regulate the amount of oil going to the cylinders by these taps here. This is an ejector which raises vacuum, which we need to work the brakes on the train. And when the engine's going, this one's actually got a vacuum pump, but up to say 10-15 miles an hour you can operate this lever here, which creates the vacuum for you, and you'll see it when we're on the way. We've got a sanding lever there and there to put some sand in front and to the rear of the wheels. We've got a drain cock lever there, because now there'll be cold steam, in effect water, in the cylinders, which doesn't compress, and when we set off and the engine's cold or mid-stood, we need to make sure that the water can escape out of the cylinders. That's why when they set off you see those great clouds of steam sometime. That's what the driver's doing.
Right away.
Good drivers like Ron always start steam engines gently, but at Minehead there's no point picking up too much speed, because they need to collect the single line token from the signalman, whose box is at the end of the enormously long platform. In steam days the holiday trains were so long that the platform here was extended to take 17 coaches or so, a measure of just how busy it was before we all had cars.
Morning. Thank you.
Morning.
And they're off for a wander through the delightful Somerset countryside. First bit of the journey is level, along the coastal plain, which suits Alan the fireman, who's building up pressure for the steeper grades ahead.
Well, we're approaching the first station of Dunster. The steam's coming round nicely, so before we pull into the station I'll put the injector on, because although the boiler's fairly full, there is room for a bit more. So, and also stop it blowing off while it's in the station. We've got a little bit of time then to get things sorted, ready for the attack on Washford Bank. My favourite bit.
Washford Bank, pitching to 1 in 65, is the steepest gradient on the West Somerset Railway, and it's a place where the big 280 freight engine can really open her lungs. Pressure's coming up nicely towards the mark, and as the driver opens out, you can see her nosing left and right, the effect of 2 outside cylinders the size of dustbins. The engine's a real heavyweight. In fact, the stretched version was the Great Western's heaviest locomotive. The pull up towards Washford Station is effortless. This is one engine that isn't going to slip or stall, and for a moment you could almost imagine her straining up into the light from the Severn Tunnel with 1,000 tons of coal behind and a banker trying its best to help. Churchward's long and brilliant career was at its zenith when this type appeared in 1910, and in fact the very next year he produced his important 260 tender engine, the Mogul, another of those GWR designs adopted everywhere else, but never really bettered. Ray Rice remembers one of his first meetings with a Mogul.
I worked one of them all the way to Margate. Now this engine had been used all through the year with good strains. Now come the summer season, when you've got all the excursions, all your Barmouths and your Bournemouths and your Margates, some of those engines were thrown into passenger work. I had butterflies in my stomach, I tell you. But you've got 10 coaches on and you've got a dirty 63 which have been doing goods work all through the winter. How's it going to act? Anyway, we started away from Snow Hill, and by the time I got to Bordesley on the straight to Small Heath, the needle was on the mark and I never had a problem all the way to Reading. I found out with them engines, all you do is fire the back corners a little bit over the top. And as long as you do that, you'll always have steam. There's no throwing it up the front, because you've only got a small firebox. A good sloping firebox, but it's not long. You just fire the back corners and a bit over the top. And I fired all the way to Reading and never had a problem.
The way the fire was drawn, the design of the engine, it'd pick up little bits of coal and whatnot, hit the brick arch, all drop, and you had a nice 1.5 inches, 2 inches of nice bright fire under the arch, so you just fired the back. If you fired the front, you soon knew about it because the clock started going back. It had only pulled so many coaches and it had only pulled so many trucks, but I used to like working on them.
Moguls invaded the Southern, the Midland and the LNER, and after nationalisation, British Railways built 3 different classes. This one still performs heroically on the main line, and they all owe their existence to Churchward's broad-minded awareness of American designs. A ride on Churchward's mixed traffic masterpiece gives an insight into why this handy jack of all trades was popular with engine men.
Nigel says we have the right to proceed. Thank you. Very gently here because there's an open crossing. Make sure there's no cars or people trying to cross in front of the train. Nice and compact engine, not a very big firebox, quite economical, very powerful. These engines were used on general purpose work Passenger freight, a lot of branch lines, as they were very suitable, not too heavy for branch lines. Ease the engine right back till it's just coasting along. We can keep an eye out here and make sure all our happy passengers aren't standing too close to the platform edge. And a little bit of brake in there. And hopefully to bring ourselves to a stop by the stop board.
And then there was the king. No one put more power onto 10 wheels.
The Kings were built for pulling weight. The Castles was a faster engine, they was like the racehorse, but the Kings were built sheerly for the two lines, the West of England line and the Wolverhampton line.
Unless you added 2 trailing wheels under the cab, you were stuck with a firebox less than 4 feet wide. And to get enough grate area, that meant making the Kings very long. 11.5 feet is about as far as a fireman can be expected to throw coal. Clive Groom remembers working a King to Plymouth, a real culture shock compared with the wide firebox express engines on the Southern.
Well, it was very different, firing from the opposite side of the footplate, shoveling off the floor instead of off a shovel plate, shoveling into a box which was 11 feet long, using the shovel full of coal, maybe 14 pounds of coal on a shovel, which we would never do, and throwing the coal into a heap into the middle of the box. But the engine steamed perfectly because of the design of the firebox. The coal was Welsh, the firebox was designed to burn it, the flat was pulled up in between shovels by a chain, the pace of it all was unhurried, no flapping, no excitement, just steady bonk, 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 and I thought, gosh, this really works.
For many years, King Edward I has been the reigning monarch of the GWR's mainline survivors, looked after by the dedicated volunteers of the 6024 Preservation Society.
Well, the King is basically just an enlarged castle, which was an enlarged star, so it's just a continuation from that. It's a larger firebox, larger boiler, and although the cylinders are the same size, I think the first 2 locomotives they built had 1/4 of an inch larger diameter cylinders, but they found that it wasn't necessary, so they went back to 16-inch diameter cylinders.
This was Churchward's blueprint, pumped up as big as possible. The GWR's crushing response to the Southern Railway's Lord Nelson class, which had claimed to be the most powerful express engine. To get 40,000 pounds of tractive effort, the driving wheels are a bit smaller than the castles, though the front end is as inaccessible as ever, a real plumber's nightmare. It's the price they paid for that elegant exterior, which was minimalist but decorated with some twiddly bits you'd expect to find on a fairground engine.
To an outsider, a Great Western locomotive, Castle King, most of the big 460s that the Great Western built, they look how you would expect a steam locomotive to look. And with the green, the Brunswick green, the copper cap chimneys, the brass safety car bonnets, and all the brass beading, number plates, name plates, they're very, very pleasing to the eye. And when they're working, there's very little that will come up to a Great Western exhaust note anywhere.
But there's a catch. All Stephenson's fault. For Brunel wanted the rails 7 feet apart, but Stephenson prevailed with less than 5. So the King has no more space between its wheels than that puny little rocket.
It's basically the Achilles heel of the King to a certain extent, the narrow firebox. It's the big difference between the narrow and the wide firebox is you can basically get more grate area in a large square Pacific type box. I think the airflow is probably better through it, and if once you've got once the King starts to get on top of you and you're losing pressure, it's a very unforgiving machine.
It's also a very hungry machine. Once there were watering holes every 40 or 50 miles, troughs where the King could slake his thirst. But nowadays on each outing, it's water capacity that limits how far the King can roam.
The tender on the King holds 4,000 gallons of water. You would say a maximum of 70, at a push 80 miles before you needed to fill the tender again, which would leave you hopefully with around about 1,000 gallons still in the tender.
And in respect of coal consumption, as a rule of thumb, the King gets about as far on a ton of coal as the family car will travel on a gallon of petrol.
I would have said 32, 34 miles to the ton, I would think.
A lot of fuel.
A lot of fuel, a lot of shoveling indeed. You've got to be fit to keep your feet on here while you're doing 75 mile an hour, and you've got to get the coal right down the front of the firebox occasionally, which is an 11.5 foot firebox. You've got to be quite a fit person.
The amount a fireman worked would not only depend on the state of the engine, the weight of the train and geography, but also on the driver.
We had two types of enginemen. We had enginemen and drivers. An engineman could burn less coal and get there at the same time, but a driver, he liked to hear the chimney. Unfortunately, you worked harder with a driver than you did with an engineman.
Jeff White can remember like yesterday a day's work firing a King on the heavy trains to Wolverhampton and back from his home depot at Old Oak Common near Paddington.
When we took an engine off shed, like to work the 310 Wolverhampton in the afternoon off, we took an engine off Old Oak Common up to Paddington. It was a clean fire, clean engine. You got 7 ton of nice coal, soft coal in the tender. You go through the Wolverhampton and back, and it was when you left Princess Risborough, and on the way to Ruislip, you'd pack up then, and you'd get your long pricker out, fire iron as it was called, a pricker, and you'd virtually level all your fire over. The driver wouldn't be working the engine at all hard because it was flat track, and you'd just zoom down towards Old Oak Common for, I don't know, 10-15 miles, but he wouldn't be burning a lot of coal, wouldn't be burning, and the fire would run down. So when you run into Paddington, you'd finish.
If the King was the motorway express of the GWR, then its country lanes were patrolled by engines like this. Introduced by Collett in the 1930s, and faster than they looked. There were tails of 80 miles an hour. It was a quaint, very non-Churchward look, but they flew along on driving wheels 5 feet 2 inches high, a size they shared with other Collett engines. Like this type, once widespread, but now reduced to a single survivor. .060 tender engines were rarer on the Western than elsewhere. The 2251 class was intended as a mixed traffic machine that could operate almost anywhere on the system. The 2 Collett types have been a mainstay of the South Devon Railway, and today the unique .060 is in service. The fireman, Dave Dadds, worked on the Eastern in steam days at Stratford Shed in London. He and his driver Ron Reynolds are looking forward to a pleasant day in the wilds of Devon and the height of summer. What the Collett .060 offers is a roomy cab, good visibility, and just the right power for a preserved line. It's been a very successful year for the Heritage Railways. People seem as keen as ever on that ride down memory lane. And there's always an audience. Western locomotives are unusual in that the regulator is kept slightly open on the move.
On this one, if you look closely, there's a notch. When the regulator is fully shut, that shuts what we call the W valve. So there's no steam getting to the condensing coil. So therefore the lubricator won't work. But while you're running, we just crack that open slightly. It opens that valve and allows steam to condense, and the lubricator will work while we're moving. Right, we've got the signal now, we're ready to move. So we create the brake, full forward gear again, right away from my mate, warning whistle, open the regulator steadily. You feel the engine start to take the strain. Because we're on a curve, the engine can tend to slip very easily if you try and open it too much. My fireman must be quite happy. He's just stoking his pipe up again.
And the reason Dave Dadds is happy is that he's learned how to cope with the Collett's little ways.
Most Western engines are designed to have a deep fire just inside the box and thinner further forward. But that is a trick of the Western engines, they're designed for that. This particular engine's got quite a shallow firebox. Most Western engines are about so deep under the fire, under the door, so it takes a fair bit of coal. This one is a shallower firebox, so it's quite easy to fill up. At the same time, it's quite easy to make a mess of it and not put enough in. Before you know where you are, you've got fire bars showing, the steam drops like a stone.
It's Ron's favourite engine, but what are its best points?
Well, the fact that it got a nice roomy cab for a start, you can move about, and also the engine is very responsive, and it will do anything you ask providing you treat it right. It steams very well, and it's just a nice joyful engine to be on.
The last pitch to Buckfastleigh is 1 in 50, so engines have to work hard. At a pinch, the 060s could handle most trains, but 8 years into their life, Collett dreamed up something sexier. The Manors were unveiled. They were the smallest of the 10-wheeled named classes and were built in 2 batches, one either side of the Second World War. And we can join the crew on the footplate as they prepare to take a Manor out of Bishop's Lydiard station. The engine is number 7820, Dinmore Manor, one of 9 survivors. The scene is pure Great Western, with the fireman working with infinite care to prepare for the hilly road ahead. He'll pay particular attention to the back corners of the firebox.
Thanks, Clive.
Thank you, Ron.
That allows us to go through the section, the single line section. It tells us that there's no other train in that section.
Pressure's approaching the red line. They've got 6 coaches in tow, which is a modest load for a manor.
Right away. As we go up around the corner, I should be looking to see if the section signal is in a clear position so that we can proceed into the section. I should take the reverser back another notch to save steam. Now close the blower.
While the driver keeps an eye on the rolling English road ahead, his fireman demonstrates the Great Western way of firing. A flap is pulled up after each shovel to limit the rush of cold air over the fire. The engine needs to get its primary air supply from underneath the fire, drawn up through the fire bars by the pull of the exhaust. It's one thing to get a train on the move, but quite another to bring it to a stop. And it's worth watching what Ron does to bring it smoothly to a standstill in exactly the right place. Like any driver, he needs to be thinking about his approach literally miles ahead, well before the station comes into sight, which is why you need to know the road.
Before I shut the regulator, I can open the blower so that the steam doesn't go back. Now shut the regulator. In order to coast, I should put the engine into 45% cut-off. As I run into the station, I should apply a small amount of brake in order to take up all the slack in the braking system, known as setting the brake. When I finally apply the brake, I should create more vacuum in order to bring the train to a nice smooth stop. Thank you. Now set the brake by applying just a small amount. Now I shall do the final stop by applying more brake and blowing it back off to give a nice smooth stop.